I went viral last month, one for being right, one for being wrong. It was quite interesting to see how nice the Reddit community can be. We looked after Opus 4.7 came out. We wanted to understand how it performed when you provided context to it. And some of our early findings in assessing 9 models across 11 Node.js agent skills was that actually if you take a smaller model from Anthropic, which is much more viable from a cost perspective, with the right context, it just performed just about the same. Good evening. I'm really grateful that all of you guys came out on a Thursday when you could have probably a beer or two. So before I just kick off the presentation, I'd love to get a sense of the room because I think it will alter the way I present this. So first of all, can I get a show of hands who is a software engineer? Okay. Who is a engineer manager? Okay. And anybody a bit above that, VP or? Okay, gotcha. And out of curiosity, what are you guys, the other non-engineering folks, doing? What's sort of like your roles or?
Founder.
Sorry?
I'm a founder.
Founder, pretty cool title. And
Data scientist.
Data scientist. Okay, gotcha. Cool, nice. A show of hands of who has played with agent skills. Nice. Okay, and just this is for my own curiosity. Can I get Claude, folks? Can I get Codex? Interesting. Okay. And Gemini,
Hermes.
yeah, Hermes, yeah. Cool, okay. So.
Yeah, we're rubbish.
Sure. That's not what you said before.
All right. So I went viral last month, one for being right, one for being wrong. And it was quite interesting to see how nice the Reddit community can be. Now, it also, in contrast, some people mentioned things that resonated with some of the things I was talking about. Now, not to gatekeep this too long, what we were trying to do, a colleague and I, was we looked after Opus 4.7 came out, the model. We wanted to understand how it performed when you provided context to it. And more importantly, how it worked as the frontier model versus some of its, I don't know, younger brother, younger sisters that are not just as good. And some of our early findings in assessing 9 models across 11 Node.js agent skills was that actually, if you take a smaller model from Anthropic, which is much more viable from a cost perspective, with the right context, it just performed just about the same. And half of the community was ecstatic about that, the other half not so much. But the point of this isn't necessarily to say we're right, we're wrong. It's this thing that we touched a nerve. And my read of this is that if you touch a nerve, it feels like it's a signal for what engineers and technical folks are currently thinking about now. Now, I want to make sure that this is clear. I think what I'm about to say really matters, at least for 2026 and the next couple of years moving forward. Because whether you have not built with agents, you are building with agents, or you're like really at the edge, like the next part of the presentation hopefully should add a lot of value. Because here's the thing that we saw from this example. There's 4 defined problems we're seeing engineers face when they're developing with agents. So the first one is, we don't really know what good looks like anymore. And by that, I don't mean necessarily code quality. I mean practices, how you work from one engineer to another, from a team to another. This is still not necessarily clear. Also, we generate so much code so fast that it's quite common that now my colleagues and I, we're just like deploying code that we don't even look into anymore, because we are not trying to not bring quality in. Of course, we care about that, but it's just like some of these models are really getting much better. But also there's a nerve-wracking feeling of like, okay, at some point things could hit the fan. How are we dealing about this? Also, agents are making decisions in one review. So this is kind of like the main point I was talking about. And then the entire question of security is a big question. So I just want to highlight, so we take a step back. I think we live in a pretty cool moment. I'll take the opportunity to present myself very quickly. My name is Baptiste Fernandez, and I don't come from a technical background. I did economics. I think it's pretty cool, but not necessarily an engineering field. I initially worked for Uber in strategy, and then discovered this thing called SQL. I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. Then I worked for TikTok in analytics, so like then Python, a bit of data science and stuff. And that kind of like moved me now into the field of like developer advocacy, where I currently work for Tessl, which I'll talk to you in a bit. But why I'm showing this, I've been an avid tech enthusiast for a long time, and I would say most of my years contributing probably look like that. A couple of contributions in open source. As of 2026, I've probably contributed more in the last 3 months than my entire life. Again, not saying that this is necessarily quality, but again, it's signal. Like, as an avid enthusiast, I'm able to build and deploy more interesting things. I like to think it's interesting. Cool. So the objectives of this talk are threefold. I want to share what context is and why I think it's coming for you. It sounds very scary, but it's more like how it's going to benefit you. I would like to show you also some common pitfalls that we've looked into on the field. And finally, I want to share how how you should think you want to enable your team to develop with context and how you can upskill your team now. First point, what is context and what is coming for you? I'm going to stand on the shoulder of giants here. I don't know if you recognize his face. But so this is Patrick Dubois. If you've ever heard of this term, DevOps, he's the guy that coined the term. And Patrick has been, at the front edge of like DevOps. This is the handbook he wrote with Gene Keem. And something that he's been really thinking about is now this entire idea of like context development lifecycle. By the way, the really cool thing, I can say Patrick is my colleague. He's a really fantastic guy. So this is kind of the new sort of thinking he's having around the idea of context. So he advocates, and this is also what our startup believes in at the core, is the way software engineers are going to be developing in 2026 is first, you generate context. Context can be how a library should be used, how you want to go about a certain process, what convention your small team should follow. After generating that context, you want to, just like in a good old school test-driven development, you want to make sure this makes sense, this is tested. In 2026, this is evaluations, or short term, it's evals. So how can you eval your context, and how can you eval the output of an agent's context? I'll get a little bit more into detail. After you are happy with your context, you've evaluated it, you want to make sure that as well other teams are able to benefit from that. So this is now no longer just you and your small team, this is cross departments. These are the conventions we work with I don't know, we had a talk with Neo4j. These are the conventions that we go when we think about security practices at Neo4j. And then the last thing is the entire observation. Like, this is where the life cycle becomes a bit of a loop, where did the agent do what we wanted it to do? What did it misunderstand? What did it improvise? Or when did it become silent? And how can we sort of like improve that by regenerating that context? So the three takeaways from this is bottleneck has shifted from code to context. Context needs its own development lifecycle. And something interesting is like infinite context won't save you. This is kind of like the key thing I like to hammer here. Come again?
It makes context rot.
Exactly. So on the team and enterprise section, we are thinking of this in like a flywheel. In fact, this is a generation, like image generated by Patrick, but I think it could also be called the context opportunity, which is the context we develop our own are then shared within our teams. And those, at some point, depending on the scale of the enterprise, should also be shared cross-functionally. And at some point, this becomes institutional wisdom. So what does that mean? If there are specific API conventions within your organization, those can be defined first by a managing leader, Once those are clearly explained, policies and conventions are agreed upon, business decisions have been made, then you make sure that this context is evaluated. You evaluate as well how the agent is leveraging that context and how it outputs it. You build scenarios around it to make sure that those are working, and then you can deploy those, and then you can govern those, and then you make sure the security is in place. So to go a tiny bit deeper, a lot deeper, you can quickly check after this. So we were on the AI Engineer in London a couple of days ago. So Patrick shared this in more detail. And again, I think this subject is really resonating. Out of all the talks, this is the one that's really like gone more or less viral. So I think there's a lot of useful nuggets there. But cool. All of this was super theoretical. What does this look like in practice, and how can you benefit from that? By the way, everything makes sense so far? Yeah. Nice. So a couple of you have already told me that you're familiar with skills, but just to bring things back into a level playing field, this is the official definition by Anthropic, the creators of the skill.md sort of like markdown file. Agent skills are modular capabilities, like each skill package, instructions, metadata, and resources that an agent can then use when relevant. So who's up for a bit of demo time? Woo! Woo! Thank you. All right. So let's make things a little bit more interesting. So when you, OK, let me go here. So as now developers in 2026 trying to build with context, I want, for the sake of argument, what's the, what was this one, I think? OK, this is a skill, data build tool. OK, it's a pattern about data transformation. So say John, my colleague, is leveraging the skill, and he's advising that I should use the skill. So he sends it to me, and I want to make sure that the skill makes sense, it's rightly structured, and I guess this is perhaps the right time to talk about this. The way we're currently thinking about testing context and testing the output is twofold. The first one is the structure of the skill. Is the skill going to be activated by the agent at the right time when I need it? So this is what we call like the reviewing of the skill. This is like, does it perform well against Anthropic's best practices as it's written? That's the first bucket. The second bucket, this is I think what's even more interesting, is when I'm a VP and I've made this convention about the skill, I want to make sure that for XYZ scenario, it is working as I said. And this is when you generate scenarios upon which you test whether or not the skill is going to perform as it's asked. So you pressure test the skill. So here I'm just going to do the first bucket, which is like, is the skill written well? Is it going to be activated at the right time? Is it structured in not a too dense way? So the way you do it, and anybody can do this on your own time. I like Claude, you can use it with Codex, and you just say, can you review this skill with Tessl? Actually, let me make sure. I'll copy the path. I'm going to make this work in the background, and I'll show you the UI version of this. So the company I work for is Tessl. I'll just have a brief presentation. Tessl is a package manager. We focus on trying to version, evaluate, and provide the entire governance around context. So in this case, it's skills, but we believe that context in the age of agents is beyond skills. But just for the sake of argument, this is skills. So what I've just done with the agent working in the background is what you can see in this UI. So this is the skill that was written by somebody at the Cisco team. And their skill is to do with software security. So remember how I said there was two evaluations? The first one is on the structure. So here, this is what we call the quality. So the quality has been essentially rated on like 3 dimensions. Again, this is against Anthropic's best practices, but how is it in terms of specificity? Is it complete? Are the trigger terms quality good enough so that the agent knows to use the skill for this moment? So let's see how it's doing in the background. OK, so as you can see, Claude has found the skill, leveraged Tessl to essentially make the evaluation. We're seeing things that are working well in terms of like the name, the lowercase, short, clear, that's okay. But what's interesting is like the description, which is how a skill gets activated, that has an opportunity for improvement. I'll go a little bit more into that in a second, but the first tip I would give you as you build with context is your description, which is your activation function, is a key thing that most people miss out on. And as I mentioned, you can therefore spin up your coding agent to look into that. Now, I love the terminal, but I feel like it's sometimes a little bit easier to use a UI, so I'll just get back to this. So that was kind of like on the structure. So we can see that for the Cisco security skill, there are interesting things that can be improved upon, there's suggestions. But the thing that I think is now most interesting is the software security skill from Cisco working well when we actually give it evaluation and scenarios to work upon. So just for the sake of argument here, we said without context or with context, but just imagine it was with skill and without skill. Here, what this means is as the Cisco team is saying, I would like to make sure that this skill works very well for, say, I don't know, uses Argon2ID. So this is a scenario they've requested for, which is, I want to make sure there's a password hashing that uses this specific function. In this case, without the skill, so we use Opus 4.7, by the way. So with the frontier model, it didn't work well. What's interesting is with the skill, it also didn't work well. That means the skill has an opportunity for improvement. But then for some of the others, we can see that for no hard-coded secrets, interesting enough, Opus 4.7 doesn't do super well, but with the skill, it does well. So going back very, very quickly on the terminal side, what I can say is like, okay, cool. Can you now optimize it with Tessl? And it's going to go and optimize the skill. Cool. That's the end of the short demo. Now, what does Tessl really do? So Tessl now gives, so our focus is very much on like providing this at an enterprise level. You can do this in the public. Everything I've just done, you can use the terminal. But ultimately, we are a product for enterprise folks. We are a product where you want to make sure that things are governed in the right way. Things are provided in like private repositories. A lot of companies, in the end, those contexts will be private. And so Tessl gives that enterprise spin on how AI coding agents are used, scale, and how you improve with context. So if agent enablement is on your roadmap in 2026, or you want to know how to leverage agent, this is my calendar. Feel free to have a quick chat with me or my email. Now, secondly, one of the objectives is I wanted to show you some common pitfalls in developing context with agent skills. So we did a pretty cool outreach to the open source system ecosystem. I'm a huge fan of the open source ecosystem. I've learned so much about coding through it. And so I wanted to reach out to folks and say like, hey, we have this cool evaluation framework to help you improve your skills. And so, not to brag, but we've improved quite a lot of skills, or at least we raised a lot of PRs. All of these are PRs. So we've in total targeted 1,000 repositories. We've updated almost 10,000 skills in open source. And it would look something like this. Like, hey, looked at your repo. I saw that your performance had a bit of room for improvement. These are the main things. I'm doing this against the Anthropic best practices. So again, that first bucket, like, is it structured properly? Are you writing too much into it? Does it make sense? Is it duplicative with something else? And some of them were like happy about it. Some of them actually pushed back in a very healthy way. So this is a really big maintainer, a guy called, like the repo is Obra Superpower. It's like an agentic skills framework. And he gave us a lot of very good insights into like, I don't necessarily agree with Anthropic's approach. I believe that actually the static analysis of that first bucket is not enough. I want to make sure I pressure test the skills, and to which I essentially said, like, this is exactly it. This is why we have this second eval, where you can generate your scenarios and test them against what you actually want. But so another very big signal that I wanted to share, and why this really matters to you if you're not already actively doing this, or if you are, you should do it more. I've done a bit of cold outreach in my life, like before being a bit of an engineer. 40% people merge this. Like this is wild. Like just somebody saying like, hey, what's that?
Good conversion.
It's good conversion. My manager was happy. Yes, yes, he was. So I think this is a signal for you. Now, what are some of the things that I think I have seen, my team and I have seen, is first what I was saying. Like a big pitfall when you're developing with context and skills is vague descriptions. Descriptions is that thing I've highlighted here in green. And this is, for instance, a bad description, like this is a helpful skill for code review and quality improvement. Okay? Like, is this for Python type of code? Is this like, right underneath, we actually show a better one, which is like, okay, the activation function, so the description here is run ESLint with project rules, flag type safety evaluation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This makes a huge improvement, and that you can do it with the Tessl skill review. Another thing that we've seen is the God skill, which is a skill that does everything. Basically, that skill is very often useless because the agent never knows when to actually activate it. So, or it just activates for the wrong reason, and then the performance is even worse. I think this is the one that you probably thought about, context bloat. I've seen some skills where I've like had to trim down 1,000 lines just because super duplicative. Yeah, one last thing. Agent skills are for agents. I feel like sometimes I've seen, especially in the open source world, where it was clearly written by a human for a human, but that's the wrong audience. Like trying to explain what a REST API is or whatnot, it's just wasted tokens. And the last one is, and I think this is where it gets back to what we're saying, like that you need a sort of tool to manage all of this because skills can vary. Like it depends which model you're using, it depends exactly what it is in, like everything is context dependent. And this is why every skill are unique and every models that activate those skills are like they're different from one another. So if you, sir, are an avid Hermes agent person, then you might want to make sure that it works well for you because, I don't know, I'm a Claude fan or whatever. So I thought those activation rates were pretty insightful. So going now to the third and last part of the talk, which is how do you actually enable your team to develop context and upskill now? I think there's three main approaches. Just taking a pause here. Does that make sense? Come again?
As I just say three, yeah, well, let's see which they are.
Question, you got something optimized in the terminal, how's that doing?
Good memory. Let's look at it. Okay. So it appears that now, after reviewing the skill and looking into what the optimization should look like, it's now overwritten the first skill, showing what's changed. And yeah, without too much surprise, the front matter has been changed. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a bit of like reduction as well in terms of sizing. Yeah.
But maybe doesn't that, instead of problem of skills and LLMs, contexts and all that, isn't that just a problem of personal bad judgment in how to put directives to someone else? If you have a proper system with how-to-dos and that a human should know, therefore you have already a base to do a skill. Obviously you can word it differently for an agent, but if the system is well documented, the process is well documented, then each task should be very easy to put as a skill.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely not. The only thing I would add to that is how can you be sure that the system is indeed well written? And that's the part where I would say, okay, well, even if it's the human,
you can try.
Yeah, you just make sure to evaluate it. So it goes back to that context development lifecycle. Like something that we've done in this outreach where I help improve the skill of some folks is we've created a GitHub action. So a automation for whenever somebody improves their skill in open source, that it triggers these evaluation. And so that becomes part of their CI. It just becomes part of their workflows.
So if the skills are dependent on the model that you're using and the hardness where it's being tested, are we keeping like a catalog or a metadata, or this skill has been optimized under these conditions, and I mean, or even in the same markdown file with some comments?
Yeah, I would say two answers to that. The first one, this is where versioning is very important. And the second one is, this is where also the governance of the skill based on the convention, policy, and practices of the team matters. So if your team believes their skill works well because of XYZ, has been evaluated, and for some reason you like to use the XYZ model, perhaps Haiku, because it's a smaller model, it will be cheaper, and it works for this use case, then you have merit to continue doing like this. But if another team within the organization has, for the sake of argument, a bigger budget, and they want to make sure they use frontier models, they can evaluate your skill against Opus 4.7, and then they're going to have some sort of findings. Your skill works just as well, or maybe actually for this exact evaluation criteria, for these scenarios that we care about, we want to actually leverage this different model. Or actually, you know what, I'm just going to make a different skill. And so yours continues to run alongside for your process, whilst the other team is going to do that as well. It could be also a scenario where both of you are using the same skill, and just the different versions of the skills are updated. And so I think the core takeaway here is models are non-deterministic, and we are trying to figure out a way to bring a little bit of engineering back to it. And if we take anything from DevOps and test-driven development, is that actually there is a path where you can evaluate what you feed and what you get out of it. I think that's the key thing here. Does that make sense?
Yes, I have more questions.
Well, we'll get to them at the end if that's okay. Okay, so going back to it, how do you enable your team to develop context and upskill now? So 3 direct approaches. First one, give it a spin by yourself. Tonight, open up the terminal, give it a try, play with it, and you have a good feel at a personal level what that actually means. Once you do that as a developer, within Tessl, we have a community called the AI Native Dev. So ainativedev.io/blog, and we write extensively about this, and we try to make analysis about the latest models that come out and how that relates to skills and context. But on a, like, if I take a step back, the way you enable your team to work with agents is going to be very different at a managerial level, at a team lead level, or at a VP level. So I'm not going to spend too much time on going through all of these, but if you want to take a moment to just perhaps take a picture for this, I think this is the sort of framework we think of when thinking about what roles, how those different roles should be thinking about things based on the context development lifecycle of generating context, testing that context, distributing, and then observing, and then going back to the generation. Now, the last way is we have, so this community, we have the AI Native Dev. We are organizing a conference that's happening in June 1st and 2nd in London. This is a community-first event, very practitioner-led. There's going to be a lot of talks and actual coding exercises for you to really get your hands dirty into it. And the 4 initial problems I laid out at the beginning are going to be sort of like the key thematics of this conference. So on the, we don't know how to build with agents yet, we'll have folks from OpenAI, we'll have the CTO of Netlify, folks from Meta on how to be like an AI native developer. On the, we can't verify generated code, we have the ex-CTO of Docker, we'll have the VP of product from Baz, and Cisco, like how do you leverage specs, the spec-driven development with context. On the AI writes code faster than we can coordinate. The founder of Tessl, who's also the founder of Sneak, Guy, will be discussing how skills are the new code. We'll have distinguished engineer Brigitte Bokeler from ThoughtWorks, and the very own Patrick Dubois coming to share his latest thoughts. And on the security front, like your AI is the new attack surface, we'll have folks from Sneak, the head of DevRel from Gemini CLI, and also folks from GitHub Security. So this is an event because we want to educate the space and also try to figure things out all together. Nobody has the end solution yet, but we believe this has like really quality speakers from very senior positions. So you can scan this QR code. It has a discount code. It will knock off a little bit of the pricing directly into it. Now, to close up on this conversation and give you practical takeaways or things to think about as you get back on your way, SDLC, software development lifecycle, is changing. We believe that it's now the rise of the context development lifecycle. One of the ways we believe this is, the key pillar of this is thinking of test-driven development and having evaluations be part of your workflow. As mentioned, we are thinking of these evaluation of skill, structure, and activation versus actually pressure testing your skills. For managing engineering managers, VPs, team leads, like whether you're getting 50 or 2,000 engineers, it's ultimately an agent enablement problem. If this is on your roadmap, have a chat with me after or go on Tessl.io. Cost saving opportunity is something that I invite folks to look into. Maybe you can use a skill with a lower model. That's what the data is signaling to us. And finally, code is the artifact and context is the asset. So if I'm wrong about anything, I'll see you on Reddit again. Thank you.